The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There is no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. They were careful as someone crossing an iced-over stream. Alert as a warrior in enemy territory. Courteous as a guest, fluid as melting ice. Shapeable as a block of wood. Receptive as a valley. Clear as a glass of water. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment. Not seeking, not expecting, she is present and can welcome all things. So this is a Taoist poem that was brought to my attention, I think, last year in our spiritual poetry group. And it really struck a chord with me. Be careful, alert, courteous, fluid, shapeable, receptive, clear, be patient, be present. Welcome all things. Welcome all things. When we welcome all things, that means we welcome the good and the bad, the titillating and the boring, the pleasure and the pain, the hopeful and the dreadful. And by welcoming all things, we become free. We become free from fear's enslavement. Fear is the mind killer, the soul killer, and indeed the killer of people. And I don't mean momentary fear of a snake. I mean the constant fear, the existential anxiety that enslaves the human. And it's worse that these two fears feed each other, the immediate and the constant. And worse yet, that the constant fear prepares us to misinterpret, misperceive, and overreact to immediate stimulus. Being careful, being alert and courteous and fluid, being shapeable, receptive, and clear, being patient, being present. These are the characteristics we are told that allows us to welcome all things. All things. So if you are able to welcome all things, you are necessarily unafraid. And if you resonated with my observation made some time ago that salvation is freedom from fear, then you may understand that the way of welcome is the way of salvation. Oh, Jesus, dear, here he goes again. Welcome is salvation. Why can't he just talk about unarmed black men being killed by white people and how we feel really, really irritated about that like a normal Unitarian minister does? And I get that, because this week was a struggle. My first week in the pulpit since two separate grand juries decided not to indict two officers of the state that each killed an unarmed black man, emblems of a wave of police officers killing unarmed black men and children in this country. I'm scheduled to talk about welcome. But these incidents are too many and too similar to ignore. And we are angry or defensive or heartbroken. And we rage against the cops, and we rage against the looters, and we rage against the state response to civil unrest. and we rage against the people's response to military weaponry and vehicles moving through their streets, and we rage that all of this was precipitated over the petty tripwires of stealing cigars and selling cigarettes. Tripwires latched to centuries of explosive. Rage, rage, rage. All that rage, and the only impact is on your blood pressure. I see such strong sentiment, such powerful opinions on the destruction of life. Let's have a vigil. Make a statement. Well, congratulations, Unitarian Universalists. I do not like vigils. I mean, consciousness raising is well and good, and it's probably a good thing to have a container for our emotions so that we don't suppress them. But really, unless they are large enough to be demonstrations to the wider public, a vigil seems to me to be awfully self-serving. You think Eric Garner's widow is much consoled by a bunch of white people she doesn't know way out on a hilltop in Tucson, Arizona, being sad together in the name of her husband? Probably not much. And make no mistake, sermons are little better. For all the good they do, sermons are little better. Protests are actually something, but they're only a small something. I think about all the promise that the Occupy movement had. That was a massive and long-lasting demonstration resulting in precious little change. So there are two places that I can see where real and lasting cultural change occurs with intention. One is in the halls of the very institutions that we are seeking to change. So is it time to abolish the grand jury system? The British abolished it in 1930. And if it's true that, as has been so famously described of late, a prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich in a grand jury on the one hand, and while not indicting a man who applied a banned chokehold to an unarmed man to the point of death while it was filmed, is not indicted, then I think we have a problem. But I don't know how to begin to abolish the grand jury system. And I don't know enough to know if that's actually the best course of action. Although it sounds like a worthwhile conversation. And actually, in our way, here at MVUU, we are combating some of the underlying problems by supporting one of our justice partners, Arizonans for a New Economy. They're the ones that are trying to establish a public bank in Arizona, a cause which will strengthen our middle class, a cause which has now been taken up by our own Senator Farley. You see, it has long been the strategy of the powerful to divide the vulnerable by race and religion. A little plug here. We are hosting a forum on public banking on January 8th. That's a Thursday. So if we strengthen our middle class, we become less vulnerable, then we become less easily divided because we are less afraid. And that gets us to the other place where real and lasting cultural change occurs with intention. This brings us to our soul. And it is easy to see into the soul of this country. And while it is actually more difficult to peer into our own souls, we can. And if we do so with care and alertness and clarity and fluidity and receptivity, we can. And when we do, we shall see the same thing there that we see on the news. We are afraid. So we are afraid. We are enslaved by our fear, and this affects all aspects of our life. It affects our sleep, our relationships, our families, our spouses and partners, the way we act toward one another here at church, how we manage time, how we drive, how we vote, how we speak and hear, how we die, how we love. It affects our lives, and our lives together affect our culture. Nothing changes until this begins to change. Today we're talking about how welcoming all things has something to do with personal and institutional racism. But at its root, racism isn't actually a question of race, and it's certainly at its root not a question of policy, it's a question of fear. And the foundational fears here do not look much like their final versions, which are very real and very deadly. Being afraid of losing a little piece of your identity or a little bit of your power somehow winds up over the course of time, imagination, and experience to be shooting a kid. They don't look alike, but they're related. So we're afraid, and it's not like white people are inherently afraid of black people, or black people are inherently afraid of white people. That actually takes a lot of history. And that history began in a more fundamental place, which is a place where I think we can do some work. We are enslaved by fear of the unpleasant, of the uncontrolled, of not being in control. We are formed by the fear of not having what we have, or of not having what we don't have. We're enslaved by the fear of death and loss, even though death and loss are the price of admission. We are afraid of what each other will cost us. We are afraid of what we have done, what we have allowed to happen. And we are afraid of losing ourselves, and so are afraid of being ourselves. And that fear in each of us individually has driven all of us together insane. Folks, we are insane. Our country and our culture is insane. And we are not apart from our country and culture. We are not apart from this moment in history, this accumulation of violence, this culture built on the backs of enslaved people, on the lands of native people, and the bamboozlement of poor people. We are actually a part of that. It is a part of us. We profit from it. We suffer because of it. We toast over it and medicate to escape it. It is within us, and we are of it. And to address this insanity, we actually first must welcome it. We must welcome our shame, our history, and our sins, or suffer the undoing of all of our work and accomplishments and dreams and good intentions. We are implicated in the successes of our history. We are. And there is a lot to celebrate. But without a reckoning, it is a house of sand, and the tide is rising. So when I first conceived of this sermon, it was going to focus on how welcoming the stranger is really a practice of welcoming oneself. That without welcoming who you are fully, with all your grace and all your flaws, it is impossible to fully welcome the other. And that is still true, and that is still what this sermon is about. The current climate of our culture has compelled me to focus on our flaws, which, lo and behold, is the harder thing to focus on. Because I have this sinking suspicion, indeed I have the unfortunate experience, that it is all too easy for us to accept our flaws, even to accept them, but without really examining them, without feeling implicated by them. Or maybe we examine some of them, the easy ones, the superficial ones, without even acknowledging, much less examining the more difficult ones. So, for instance, accept that I have a short temper, high cholesterol, and drive my car too much. I accept that, right? Okay. It's easy. Then I'll get in my car, get impatient with the car in front of me, lose my temper, and eat a donut. All right? But I don't do the deeper work of acknowledging the truth that I bully, have a food self-esteem issue rooted in some childhood trauma, and am dying from it, and do not do the one thing that I can do that would have a real impact on climate change, which is stop eating beef. So we not only need to acknowledge, but examine, feel the implication of these things. And if we don't, what that is called, my friends, is denial. And we humans are adept at it. There's probably a sound evolutionary reason why we have the capacity for denial. That I'm looking at Tom. He's giving me the thumbs up. I don't know. But we're really, really good at it. And it is part of the root structure of racism. And much like Fight Club, you remember Fight Club, the movie Fight Club, the book Fight Club? The first rule of denial is that there is no denial. So I'm afraid you're stuck. You can't get out of it. The moment you tell me that you don't have a denial problem, I mean, that which you deny is most likely the very thing that you should pay attention to, examine, welcome. And this is within reason. You're, not going to be wrong for denying that you can levitate a yacht just by thinking about it, right? But to say that we do not participate in and are thereby made complicit with a racist structure that is literally killing people, that's a far more reasonable thing than it is a comfortable thing. And it is right where we need to be looking. We need to be looking for where we feel complicit. So welcoming all things, as the ancient sages suggest, is the final result of a list of virtues, including patience, alertness, fluidity, and receptivity. And you'll note that reactivity, ignorance, rigidity, and defensiveness are not on that list. Yet that is right where many of us spend most of our lives, and it is an outrageous tragedy and an utter waste of time. Yet I must welcome even that. Nothing changes until this begins to change. For our culture to change, it must begin with us, each of us. Not them, whoever them is for you. It starts with you. It starts with patience, with alertness, with flexibility and receptivity. We'll do the policy stuff. We'll do that too, and we'll raise consciousness also. We'll make some noise. But real change happens in the heart. Happens first in the heart. And a part of fixing the problem is figuring out how we are a part of it. Welcome that truth into your soul. Wonder why you resist that truth. What do you feel it will cost you? You face that fear and welcome it, not as condemnation even, but as part of who you are, as we did with the meditation. We welcome the good and the bad, the titillating and the boring. We welcome pleasure and pain, the hopeful and the dreadful. And in so doing, we find ourselves finally free from fear and able to pursue right action. The ancient masters were profound and subtle. Their wisdom was unfathomable. There's no way to describe it. All we can describe is their appearance. They were careful, as someone crossing an iced-over stream. Alert as a warrior in enemy territory. Courteous as a guest. Fluid as melting ice, shapeable as a block of wood. Receptive as a valley. Clear as a glass of water. Do you have the patience to wait till your mud settles and the water is clear? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? The master doesn't seek fulfillment, not seeking, not expecting. She is present, and she can welcome all things.